Hi everyone, you're listening to the First Year Decoded podcast hosted by IEEE UofT, the show that decodes the first year experience by providing valuable insights and experience from current engineering students. I'm your host, Brittany Chow, a Truck 1 AC222 and one of the logistics directors at IEEE UofT. Along with producer Akinori Kimura, we will explore various topics of academia and professional development to help you succeed in your first year of engineering. Today's guest on the First Year Decoded podcast is Christopher Yip, the Dean of Faculty of Applied Science and Engineering. As students, being able to talk with a dean is a rare opportunity, but Chris has made an effort to connect with students throughout his event Coffee with Chris, his live Instagram, and of course our podcast. We got some insights on what it's like to be the dean, why he advocates for international opportunities, and the importance of developing a global mindset. Finally, for the students looking to do research, he shared with us the research at his lab and how a first year with no experience can get such research positions. Please keep in mind that this episode was recorded on Thanksgiving this year on October 12th. Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on our podcast today. Dean, Chris, are we allowed to call you just Chris?
You can call me Chris, that's fine. Good to meet you guys.
That's perfect.
Good to meet you guys on
Yes.
a Sunday afternoon, or actually a Monday afternoon. So happy Thanksgiving
Yes.
to everyone.
Yes, how's your Thanksgiving going?
It's been a quiet one, as you might expect. Everybody's staying home and staying inside, doing a little bit of cooking, doing a little bit of cleaning up, catching up on stuff. But it's generally relaxing. So how about you?
It's been good. We actually got a small kind of like community in our, neighborhood that we have within our students. We live beside each other, so we've had a small Friendsgiving happening. Of course, with all the COVID, we're doing self-quarantine within our small group and social circles, but it's okay.
So yeah, it's a little bit different, but lots of family Zoom calls yesterday just to catch up with folks and see how everyone's doing. Not what you normally expect, despite the fact it was actually a pretty gorgeous weekend. So
Yeah. The weather's been really nice.
Yeah.
But thank you for coming on our show. And I guess for this episode, we would just like to get a sense of, you as a person,
Sure.
as a Dean of University of Toronto. And I guess we can get started. I feel like a lot of students would be wondering, what is a day in a life like for a dean at UofT?
Oh, I should just share my Outlook calendar with everybody. A day in the life of a dean. Well, I think it's multifaceted, lots of different interactions going on, and I guess it's important to remember sort of the dean is the person in charge of the faculty, and that's all aspects, whether it's undergraduate research, buildings, the whole bit. So a day in the life of the dean is one that's filled with everything from the usual you'd expect, right? Meetings and discussions with undergrads, doing podcasts, for instance, catching up with my colleagues, the other chairs and directors of the departments, hear how things are going. We often have regular one-on-one meetings with our chairs and our other faculty members to hear how things are going in the department. Meetings with other deans to see what's going on in other faculties, because we do a lot of work between faculties, understand how we can work together for the university. Often have meetings with external partners, whether that's the government or industry. Industry will come in and want to look at partnering with the faculty, either to recruit students or to actually look for research partnerships. So we do a lot of those kind of discussions. And then there's a lot of other activities. Don't forget, a dean is still a faculty member, so prepping for giving lectures, grading stuff, working on papers. There's a lot that we end up doing during the day. A lot of just catching up on things that are going on in the faculty and trying to stay on top of things. It's a busy day, but it's important. I do try to take breaks and wander through. Well, normally I'd be wandering through campus as much as possible, see how things are going. These days, the day in the life of a COVID dean is a little bit different. It consists of a lot of Zoom meetings, but it's always exciting, always changing, and that's what I love.
Yeah, we've checked out your Instagram, did a little bit on research stalking on our end, and we've seen that you've connected with a lot of student bodies just through Zoom. And yeah, what has been your kind of like most memorable COVID kind of like interaction with students moment?
COVID. Saying
Yeah.
interaction in COVID with students is probably not the right way to frame it.
Yeah.
But the I guess I would say that I mean, in general, one of the things I love the most about any day is the chance to interact with students. Whether it's getting on a Zoom call with them, pre-COVID, it would be grabbing a coffee with a student and just hanging out, listening to what they're thinking about, and you know, I just listening from students and hearing from students, and I love that. Probably it's hard to say what the most memorable thing is for me with students. I think that for me, the most memorable things I hear from students are really not so much about, you know, this is what's going on in class, or you know, we had a problem with this midterm or something like that. It's actually more about what what they're excited about. I love hearing great ideas from students about things that we could be doing better. Ideas from students about, oh, it'd be great if we had this set up in engineering. Do you think we could do that? I would love to have an opportunity to do this as part of a PY, for instance. I'd really love to be part of this program that's in arts and science. Do you think it's possible to get us in that? And those are the kind of things that I love to hear from students, why they're in engineering, what we can do to make the 4-year, 5-year process as an undergraduate better, and just, you know, what inspires the students. That to me is the coolest stuff to hear. And at the same time, you know, I am happy to be a sounding board for any challenges that students have, because that's how I learn, and how the rest of us learn about what we can do better. And we listen to students. I actively listen to students about their thoughts, their challenges, and areas that we can try to fix, and always working to do that.
Mm-hmm. So what inspired you to start your Coffee with Chris? It was to get to know the students and connect with them in a more personal basis?
Yeah, it was one of my ideas when I started as dean, for the 2T3s, I guess, who were the first year, when I started as dean. It was the very first, I think, Welcome to Engineering event in August, actually, with some of the parents. And it was that just pre-September meeting. And I walked up and I think I scared Professor Stickle at the time when he was the vice dean first year, because I said, one of the things I'm going to pledge is that I want to have coffee with every single undergraduate student in engineering before they graduate. Right? I mean, we have about 5,000 students. That's a lot of coffee. But my point was really, I want to hear from everybody about, you know, why are you in engineering? You know, what inspires you, what's interesting, what's challenging, those sorts of things. And it's a way for students to kind of, you know, get to know the faculty, get to know what a dean does. When I went through undergrad, I didn't know the dean. Dean was a person that you maybe shook the hand of at graduation, but that was about it. And if you got invited to the dean's office, that usually meant you were in trouble for something.
Yeah.
And so that's not the message I want to get out. So that's why I started the kind of Coffee with Chris as kind of a one-on-one. It's kind of exploded out into a bigger thing, and I love doing it. It's a ton of fun. You know, I've had, you know, the first year I did it, I had a student almost within the first, you know, day after I announced it, actually at the plenary lecture, I had students taking me up on that, and I had a coffee with Martin outside of, you know, in between a lecture. It was the first coffee. It was terrific, and had lots of students taking me up on it. Now it's a little bit awkward because it's virtual, but no, it's great, and I'm happy to spend the time and meet students anywhere. They don't have to come to the dean's house. Hang out in the pit, whatever, you know, go to Tim Hortons, whatever. So when we get back in person, I expect a long line of students.
Yes.
But it's a ton of fun.
Yeah, I've actually checked out myself, but I also I think I remember having an exam during that time, and I was like, ooh, and it was one of like the last few before kind of like the whole quarantine thing hit. But I think it's very cool because I've had friends attended the Coffee with Chris, and they've always been like, yeah, it's like a really fun time just to like talk about themselves and like with someone that's like super important.
Yeah, it's I think for me it's more casual, right? It's less of a, state of the nation type talk, and more of a just, we're here to listen. We're here to know what resources you need, where we're doing well, where we're not doing well. And I think that's how you make for a better experience for students. Learning these things, a lot of the changes that we're making now are because of student input. The additional resources into mental health. Right now, we're obviously doing a ton of work around the ed tech side, a lot of work around how we do, assessments and all that kind of stuff. The fall break was a result of student input into the need for a fall break. And so things like that are all because students are telling us this is what you need to do, and we're listening. So that's important.
Mm-hmm. So with COVID going on, the global pandemic, of course, you had to make a big decision that impacted everyone in engineering. So we were wondering, what are some leadership principles or kind of belief that helped guide you making that huge decision of going virtual online?
Well, I think the first decision to go online was kind of taken out of our hands, right? That was the March 13th pivot, and the main leadership decision at that point was, how do we get the resources in place to make sure that when everybody came back on Monday, that everything was moved to an online fashion, and then quickly figure out how to do the end of term assessments, right? And it worked out pretty smoothly. I think full props to, as I said before, to faculty, staff, students for being so flexible, being so nimble to the university in terms of how we were able to make that pivot for the end of last year, effectively. For this year, we made the decision in June to go online because it's so difficult to start in person and pivot back, right? Better to start virtual and then gradually come back up if you can. And I think we're seeing now that decision was a good one because of, clearly the position we're in now. Arts and science has now suddenly had to pivot. All their hybrid classes have now have had to switch back to online, pure online. So it's a much more difficult transition. For us, I think the toughest leadership decision, and again, it's not my decision, it's a decision that I take advice, obviously, and consult with all my faculty, all the students, student leadership, right? So hearing from NSOC president and so on, hearing from the vice deans, the chairs, all the members of my exec about really what's the best approach that's going to make the most sense for everybody in terms of keeping operations going, keeping our students engaged, making sure we meet all of our milestones around student progress through your degrees and all that sort of stuff, and dealing with a bit of the unknown timeline, right? We don't know when we're going to come back. So, it's not really, it's a tough decision. I mean, it's just based on good advice from colleagues. And they're hearing what other units are doing. We know what we can do in engineering. We know where our challenge courses are for engineering, courses that have to be in person, and we try to work around those. But yeah, we have actually weekly meetings with all the chairs of the departments, all the vice deans, exam committee every week. We have been having these since March. To go over what's going on across the university within the faculty, so that we're always kind of up to date and always optimizing.
I'm curious, at what point did you realize that maybe we have to go fully online last semester?
That we had to go fully online for September.
Not for this September, but that we have to transition to an online setting midway through the semester last semester.
Oh, that was pretty easy because the public health authority basically said we got to lock down the city, right? So you can't have gatherings of more than a certain size. So that immediately shut everything down. The university's that was a post-secondary that was governed by the provincial government that says we have to shut down instruction within universities. So all the stuff that the universities are doing is governed by the public health authority, and they make decisions which affect us directly. So they said you can't have gatherings more than 25 people. So right away, basically all your lectures have to pivot to virtual. And that's effectively what we had to do. So, buildings had to close, research operations had to shut down entirely. All non-essential people were told to work from home, and that was the process, right? So just the same way the businesses were shut, restaurants were shut, everything was shut. It was all, it was a decision made by the government, and basically the university was following it.
I remember it was super hectic. Like all the students were, I think it was like 2 weeks before, a week before school got shut down. Everyone was like, yeah, it's going to shut down next week. And then some people were like, really? Because we didn't really kind of see it coming. But it was definitely like, I think everyone transitioned really well, as you said. And I think the school definitely helped a lot in that sense. And all the profs were super understanding in terms of homework, mental health, and workload and exams.
Yeah, and that was the hardest one. I think the biggest, in some ways, we were lucky in terms of term work because you're only 3 weeks out, right?
Yeah.
I think the challenge we faced, which was fair enough, was we didn't know if we'd come back, right? So, so then exams became a challenge, and then that was the tougher one for sure because the general rules around exams are sort of everybody had set the way their exams were going to be set back in January. And now all of a sudden you have to pivot to a whole new mode. And that changes the way, there's a whole kind of governance structure about how you set exams. So that's why we had to declare a lot of disruptions and change things up. And I think for students, full credit to students because especially for those who are international, deciding, do I hang out to try and maybe write an exam in person, what may or may not happen, or do I try to get home before a border gets shut, right? So you had a lot of students who were somewhat trapped in between, and that's where there was a lot of kind of helping to move people back and forth. The university had to repatriate a lot of our students who were abroad, get them back into Canada before the borders got shut. So there's a lot of behind the scenes work that was underway, and there still is right now about this whole process. So it's very, very complex.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. So
but it was fast. It was amazing how well it worked. So.
So at UofT, we help undergraduate students gain, I guess, soft skills and technical skills necessarily to be successful in, I guess, the EC industry or just engineering industry in general. So what do you think is like the most essential skill to be successful in industry as an engineer?
To me, I think the most successful skill is the ability to learn. And one of the things we're trying to teach students right now, or just get in as part of a mindset, is really this idea of lifelong learning, right? Your 4-year degree, or your undergraduate degree, whether it's 4 or 5 if you're doing PEY, it's really just setting a foundation. And when you get out there, you're going to be learning things that you never covered in undergrad. And so part of the expectation is that students learn the ability to build off of that foundation, to pivot, to use their problem-solving skills in different angles. And I think that to me is the most important skill, is to be well-read, to be aware of kind of globally aware, globally agile students, and students who are able to leverage their technical background from their 4 years into almost any sector. That I think is the most important thing to come out of, from a university experience in general, is that it's not whether you can do a Bessel function or something like that. Or do a fast Fourier transform on something, or be able to integrate. It's the ability to know when you need to do those sorts of things and how to do them, but also to apply your skills into different sectors. You are all very well aware that people pivot careers often now as they go through life, and the ability to pivot means your ability to learn as you move into those new sectors. And I think that's, to me, is a super important skill. It's also to always be curious. I think that's a really essential skill.
Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit how you wanted to see like the students becoming successful globally, and you strongly advocate for students getting international experience. And so we were
Mhm.
wondering where like your passion for students getting international opportunities come from.
Oh, so that's I get that question a lot. It's a pretty it's a good one, and it really came because as many of you know, I spent 2 years as the associate vice president for the university in the international partnerships office, and just prior to being appointed to that role, I represented engineering when I was the director of biomedical engineering. I went on a trip to Israel with the vice president research and the vice president advancement. So it's sort of my first real kind of inter-university tour to sort of meet folks in different institutions. And when I went into the AVP role, I spent a lot of time traveling the world and meeting other institutions, seeing how they were doing, meeting companies and corporates in other countries as well, and representing the university as a whole. And what I came away from that was the realization that it's super important for students to be aware of the global context, what's going on in different countries, how things work in different countries, and to learn from that experience and to be able to apply their skill sets into that experience. You know that Toronto's the world's most culturally diverse city, right? 140 different languages spoken, and even in engineering, we draw from 60 different countries just into our own programs every year, and all of our students go around the world as well, and a lot of our students work for multinationals as well. So I think what's important is for students to understand, how things are done in one country, how they may be different in a different country, to be able to pivot and work in different environments, to understand the global dynamic that comes into play. If you can see right now the geopolitics that are in play around the world, how that affects international business, how it affects corporations as they work. We've seen, because of the pandemic, how the global supply chain is disrupted when you rely on one country to supply the majority of your materials. So how do you create manufacturing in different sites? So for me, it's important that students get that international experience, be able to converse in multiple languages if they work for a company, being able to move to different countries to work for that same company in different countries, I think is a really important opportunity. And so that's what I think is key. A lot of Canadian students don't go abroad. They stay in Canada, they stay in North America. A lot of students from Asia or from Europe are very familiar with going around the world and doing different things. And one of the things I'd love is that, along with having coffee with every single undergrad, is I want every single undergrad to have an international experience before they graduate. Whether that's PEY, whether that's a course where there's a component that they go abroad, something like that, I think it's so important for students to understand how things work in different places, especially in the developing world, in places that they may not be as aware of, and so that's a challenge.
Yeah, that. Yeah, me and Bernie were also looking to go study abroad this semester, and I was looking to go to Taiwan because I wanted to learn a lot more about the culture of Taiwan, and she was looking to go to Singapore, but unfortunately, because of the COVID situation, it got canceled. And so my question is like, because during these times it's kind of hard to get that international experience. How do you recommend students during COVID to have that international perspective?
Yeah, the COVID messed up so many of my grand plans. So, one of the things and this came up actually at a Global Engineering Deans Council meeting as well, because a lot of foreign institutions have very well established international programs where they as part of their degree, the students must spend a year abroad in another country, and so they often come to partner with U of T, and it's part of their undergraduate program. It's not something we do routinely, so it obviously disrupts them as well. So for us, I think what we are looking at and strategies around that is actually, international capstone teams for instance, multidisciplinary capstone where you've got the same design project being split between two different institutions. So you could have NUS partnered with, NUS is a National University of Singapore, is a major partner of U of T, right? And so for us to share a capstone design project between the two gets you a chance to have the two classes effectively collaborate on a common project. You really make a global team around that. The Invest project that's run out of iStep by there is another example of a multidisciplinary team that's bringing together students from different countries to work on the same project. And so those are great examples of things that can be done. It's a little bit, you need to formally set those up, so it's a little bit harder obviously this year. But those are things that I think going forward, we're definitely going to be looking at as an opportunity. You get the experience of working across time zones. So Brenny, the 12-hour time zone is a 12-hour time shift's a bit much. But you know, it's one way to work in a global team. Obviously, my preference is for students to physically go to the other country and work there. That makes it's a much more immersive, obviously, and a lot, I think, a lot more enlightening to take that kind of experience. So we'll move back to that mode, I think.
Hopefully,
we'll be able to, hopefully we'll be able to do that. Obviously, summer research and things like that, where you can go and spend the extended period of time in the country, works, because even if you have to quarantine, then you can at least quarantine for 2 weeks and then you're there for 4 months, so then it's not as big a deal. The flying over and back in a week isn't obviously as doable now, and I also think is not as immersive in an opportunity as being able to spend a 4-month term. And so I'm interested in looking at those sorts of opportunities and how we can leverage those.
Yeah, I hope, I guess, we still have a chance next year, because we were looking to go in third year, since fourth year we have Capstone, and then like next year is like PUI coming up. So I guess from my perspective, I just really want to find another time slot, I guess, a 4-month time slot for me to go abroad to do, I guess, if, as you mentioned, the cross like country like capstone projects, I think would be like a great idea if I can, even like after COVID, physically go do a capstone in NUS.
Those are things that we've looked at. We've looked at exchange opportunities as well, right? Where you do a full term exchange and you look at just like a straight up exchange opportunity, right? And I think, you know, those are the more formal ones, and the idea we're looking at right now is to try to be way more flexible than we have been in the past about what those requirements are, how the courses match up. You know, credit from the other institution against the credits you need on our side. There are you know, restrictions around some of those things. It seems a bit odd, but you know, U of T is more restrictive about it than other institutions. So students coming from abroad spending time here seem to get much easier time getting credit at their home institution than we are about giving credit gained at other institutions. But I'm hoping that we can come up with a better scheme around that. So yeah, it's all a work in progress.
Have you ever had the chance to talk with a student that went abroad and came back through any programs?
Oh, lots. I mean, I've even had students in my own group who have spent time abroad. Wilson Poon, who's actually just finished his PhD in biomed, is now in San Francisco. He was an undergrad NSci, and the example is he had an opportunity to either do a summer internship in my lab or a summer internship at NUS. And he said, what should I do? I said, you go to NUS. there's no decision there. I think it's pretty straightforward. Go to NUS. There's an example where, you know, he went over to NUS, he did the summer thing there, and I think he enjoyed it immensely. So we've had lots of students who do that sort of thing. We had other students who have spent a term, you know, at MIT under a MacArthur Fellowship, where they spent their last, you know, fourth year there for ChemEng and things like that. So there's lots of examples. I don't think any students come back and said it wasn't a great experience. You know, ignoring the paperwork part of it, because that's always a pain. It doesn't really matter who's doing it. It's always a pain to do that paperwork. But I think the experience part of it works out really well. And this extends to graduate students as well. I think graduate students are in a position where obviously they're more flexible from coursework, but the opportunity of going abroad as part of a grad program I think is important too as well. One of my PhD students spent 4 months in France last year on a MyTax Global Link award, and now she just flew back over, and she's there for a year in France working in a collaborators lab as part of her PhD project. So fully funded, so great opportunity for her, right? So there's lots of that sort of stuff available now.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that just seems crazy to me. Like the idea of like being able to just go to different places and do still like the thing that you love, like engineering, and it's just so amazing.
Yeah, no, it's great, and I think it's for students. It's part about building the network, right? Meeting students in other countries. For undergrads, this is where undergrads doing research in labs. There's great opportunities for summer undergrads, obviously, to go and work in different institutions as well. And then you become part of a network, right? And it's you often see undergraduates who have met other undergraduates through a summer program at a different institution. They go to grad school, they stay connected, and it just builds from there. And those are really great opportunities for students.
Mm-hmm.
Since our podcast focuses on delivering knowledge and experiences for the first years, we were wondering, we saw that in your Instagram you had the chance to interact with some of the first year students that are coming. And so I'm wondering, like, what were some of the advice you gave to those first years, and what was the interactions you had with them?
Yeah, so I guess if you're talking about the sort of the first year scholarship students,
Yes.
there's usually a scholarship lunch, and that's where we talk to the first year scholarship awardees. But certainly I want to talk to all first years, and so that doesn't really matter. But my advice to all first years, I think, I was a first year once a while ago. I think it's just to not, university is intimidating, and there's a lot of stuff on the go. And I think the key is to sort of, that sort of be true to yourself, sort of, you're doing what you're interested in. You set your own metrics. Don't worry about everybody else's metrics. And do what you're interested in doing. You're in engineering because you yourself personally had an interest in a particular field. Look at where your courses will take you at a first, second, third, fourth year. Start to map that out, especially in first year, because you have the ability to pivot. If you're in a program that you don't think is like lining up really well for you, then you say, well, I'd like to move from I'll say EE to another program, or whatever, just because you just, maybe, actually I got really interested when I started hearing some of these option talks, or I went to a seminar about this, and I think I'd love to get into the business minor, and you start to map those things out. You can sort of see, you can kind of chart your own path through the program. And I think, students being proactive and identifying a path that they want to take through the program is going to make for the best experience. Sort of don't be passive, ask lots of questions, always ask questions, and reach out to your first year advisors, reach out to your faculty members, reach out to your friends, and just, always be talking to people. Everyone's going through the same experience. The other 1,100 or 1,400 in this case, first years are all going through the same thing right now. You're all online, so clearly you're all going through the same experience. So I think that's, talk to people, talk to students, friends outside of your class. That's one of the downsides right now, is that, we're so online that you really are just within your cohort. Whether if you're in residence, you might be, sharing a room with someone who's in a completely different field. But I would, go to some of these, go to the meetups, drop in on the podcasts, drop in on the Instagram live chats that I have, and just, take advantage of kind of the online stuff, because there's a lot more of it now. A lot easier to get into, to just learn about what opportunities are out there. Lots of stuff on the go. The clubs are still running, albeit somewhat virtual. And I think the other one, I think for students, especially if you feel like you're really getting squashed, right? Like, this is really intimidating. I feel I'm kind of online all the time, so I see lots of people, but I'm actually at home all by myself. and it's not great. I think you want to reach out to people and start talking with people if you're feeling any kind of anxiety or things like that. Lots of resources around to reach out, and people are there to listen and kind of help work through any of that kind of those challenges that are kind of typical for first year anyways, but this year's made a little bit worse because you are online. Do know that for the students who are actually abroad right now, we are working with NSOC and our engineering alumni network to build regional events or regional meetups so that they're kind of at least in the same time zone, and perhaps, depending on where you are, maybe even physical at some point. Getting groups together and stuff like that. So a great way to connect with alumni and stuff. So yeah, students should definitely reach out if they have any challenges and any questions. So I'm always available. First year advisors always available. Folks like yourselves are there to talk to students. So
yeah, that was kind of like the main idea we had for the First Year Decoded podcast. We would like first years to reach out to us, to reach out to the mentors like our peers that we've interviewed in our podcast. So since they don't have the in-person chance to meet an up here randomly in the pit and just start talking. So yeah, that was our main goal for the podcast.
Yeah, and I think these days everybody, I mean now it's everybody's dealing with this situation, with the online situation. So you may have people that were upper years who would normally be just like, this is great, we can let's go hang out in the pit and have a coffee and shoot the breeze, and now they're online. Everybody's feeling the same kind of problem with sort of being detached essentially from everybody else. So what everybody's feeling is common, and I think important to remember. I mean, we know we're certainly well aware of the mental stress that students are under. Workload. Online is weird. You can't stream the entire season of calculus just before the midterm. Is that a good strategy? Not like watching Netflix or something like that. So we're concerned about how students are managing their time, I think, especially if it's remote. And especially if they may have gone remote during high school and then had to go remote again for universities. And so, it's just a completely weird situation. But at the same time, I think I'm also very worried, or not worried, I'm concerned about the mental load on our faculty and our staff, because they are also under the same kind of stresses that you guys are around, of course, we're certainly concerned about how well we're delivering our material. We're worried about, our faculty are all worried about everybody in their class, how the students are feeling. We've got our TAs, who are grad students who are worried about their research, but then they're worried about being a TA. They're worried about their students they're working with. Faculty are worried about their research activities, their teaching activities, everything. So I think the world is under an enormous amount of mental stress right now, and I think that's why it's important that people feel free to sort of talk about it, reach out, but balance everything, right? Be sure that you take that time to do other stuff than problem sets and stuff.
Speaking of other stuff, we noticed that you have a hobby of running, and we kind of like searched it up a little bit, did some research. You have completed a total of 18 marathons. Am I correct?
Actually, it's more than that. I think it's around 30. It's around 36.
36.
So,
wow, that's double the number.
Yeah, no, it's a lot. I've done a lot of marathons. Yeah, something like that.
What got you into running? Like, when did you start running?
When did I start running? I think I started running around the year 2000. So I used to race bicycles, mountain bikes, road bikes, that kind of stuff through grad school. And when I came back to university, back to UT, it's hard to ride in Toronto. It's hard to be able to spend that same amount of time training on your bike. So sort of switched to running through a friend and just kind of kept doing it. So I never thought I'd run a marathon. Then I ran one, and then it just kind of kept going. So then it became one of these sorts of things you do. So now it just becomes a sort of, as you get older, are you still able to kind of keep up the same pace, or at least the same age-graded pace that you could, 20 years earlier?
Yeah, because I think a lot of our friends have been getting more into running I think since COVID started, because it's one of those easily accessible activities that you can do during the pandemic. So yeah. What's your favorite route in Toronto?
Oh, I got lots. I mean, I live in North Toronto, so I got lots from here. So it's either heading north, through Earl Bales, which is just north of me, cutting up into York region, coming back down, or running the Don Valley trails on the east or west side, things like that. So lots of different routes. The Beltline, it just depends. And then running the Bruce Trail is a ton of fun. When you get a bunch of people together and you do like a point to point on the Bruce Trail, that's a blast to do as well. So it's lots of different routes to do.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we would like to ask you a little bit about your research. So we are not entirely too familiar with, of course, the field that you're in. We know that it's like related to molecular biology and physics. I guess when did you start realizing your passion for this? When did you decided that you're going to go into this and as your research project?
Oh, so this is a long story. So I'll give you the Coles Note, which is an old term, Coles Notes version. So when I went through Chem Eng as an undergrad, my research project and my thesis project was in sort of polymers and materials research. And I actually worked for DuPont for 3.5 years full time doing polymers and plastics and stuff, structural plastics. And when I went to grad school, initially I was going to work for somebody who wanted me to do very similar work, material properties of polymers. But I ended up working for a faculty member who was doing a really cool thing around growing sort of organic nanostructures. And this was in the early days of nanotechnology. So this is back in like 91, just when all these tools were starting to be used for looking at single molecules and things like that. And it was all meant for material science. And about halfway through my PhD, I decided to say, can I use this same tool to look at proteins? And my supervisor was the supervisor who was like, you know what, you guys do whatever you want in a sense, because it's about what you want to do as your PhD, not what necessarily I want to do for my projects. And so he let me do that and go off and use these tools to look at proteins. So it was really the early days of biophysics and using these tools, these scanning probe microscopes to look at single proteins and their interactions with surfaces like membranes and things. And so that really spawned the move into the biophysics of these techniques. And that's what I brought back to U of T. It was sort of early days of being able to measure, the elasticity and the stiffness of single molecules, probing the surface of cells, looking at proteins assembled into different structures on the nanoscale. So this is work we've been doing now for almost a quarter century, and which is that's a long time. And so what was intriguing was that stuff at the time was really the only way you could truly, I mean, it still is really the only true way to get see single molecules in 3D in solution live. It was great. What we're seeing now is the emergence of light microscopy to do the same thing, and pushing the sort of the threshold, beating the diffraction limit of light and that sort of stuff. So we're moving into a field where we're building new types of microscopes that allow us to combine these techniques together. So we can probe how molecules interact, move, behave in living systems during development. So as a fruit fly develops, we want to be able to watch individual molecules come together to form complexes and structures in cells or in developing embryo, to understand that dynamic and be able to probe it, measure the time, the size. So we do a lot of instrumentation building. So there's a lot, lasers, optics, machine learning, all that sort of stuff being applied to reconstructing these structures in real time. So that's kind of where we're playing right now.
Have you had any prior, courses that you've taken in biology? Did you have any prior knowledge about the biology part before you went into this research position?
Nope. To be frank, no. So that, and that's what I mean about being curious and understanding, right, and learning. So when we went through when I went to engineering, even now when you go into engineering, you don't need biology to come in.
Yeah,
core,
that's
right?
the main thing.
And we didn't have biology even as a course really through undergrad, and all it sounds bad, but you learn stuff on the go because now the context is more interesting because it's not being sort of you're interested in the problem, so you learn the biology as you go. Same with the optics. So in chemical engineering, you would never have dealt with lasers and optics and all that sort of stuff, diffraction limits and phase planes and image planes in infinity space and stuff like this. You never would have done that, but now we do this all the time in our lab, right? Doing math, do holographic microscopy and things like this. These are things that we learn now in the lab and that you implement. So it's all been an evolution of my research program and largely as a consequence of actually what students are interested in, right? So when students come in my lab, I say, this is what we'd like to look at and problems we have to address. And the students develop the ideas and they build from that. So I let the students have kind of free reign to develop ideas and to build off of that. So our projects have evolved significantly from when I first started to where we are today. It's been fun. It's a ton of fun. The students have learned a lot. So and I've learned a lot too. So, and that's part of the process.
So I'm sure a lot of first years for next summer will be looking to research with professors. And so for like first years that don't have a lot of experience trying to get research positions, what recommendations would you give to them? And what are you looking for as a professor or as a researcher?
So yeah, we get this question all the time. And I think, first years, it's a case of, what are you interested in learning about in the lab? What's the lab done that you find intriguing, right? It's always important to sort of know what the faculty members most recently published versus what they've put on their web pages, because web pages may or may not be that current. So what have they published most recently? Talk to the grad students and see what the projects are. We often post, and we're going to be starting a bit more of a formal process of sort of like listing projects and where we're looking for students with insights into certain things. First year students are great. I find they're awesome when it comes to projects. And so you're looking just for curious students interested in learning different skills. Some students actually, based on their background may have, tremendous skills in certain areas that a faculty member may be looking for, right? Could be a coding background, could be a biology background, it could be just anything. I've taken first year life sciences students into my lab, and they've come in and done awesome stuff, and it started them down the whole path of going their PhD. So I had no preconceived idea about what they were going to do. I just said, yeah, sure, come on in, let's see what you can do, and I'm going to give you a small project, and let's see. And then within 3 weeks, she had finished it. It's like, uh-oh. I didn't think you get that far. How'd you figure this all out? I said, I don't know. I just kind of connected stuff, and this is what it's doing. I was like, wow, that's pretty cool.
Real impressive.
So students, it's awesome, right?
Yeah.
People have a lot of innate curiosity and interest in doing things, and it's really easy to leverage that.
And since I guess engineering has such a wide range, like you can do, there's all sorts of engineering and also all sorts of knowledge that you would be able to receive. A lot of students might face the question on like, oh, I don't really have a passion for anything yet. How should I go about kind of to find my passion? And what's your advice on that, like on students trying to find what they're truly like?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think people's passions also change, right? They change as you go through life. Like everything, you find things that are very interesting now that you would not have found interesting 10 or 15 years ago, and that's just because your context has changed, right? I think that this gets back to something I said earlier, which is this is part of this lifelong learning thing, and being globally curious and globally interested in things. I think this is where the more well-read, I guess is the term, a student is about what's going on, where things are, new inventions are coming up, or challenges are being posed. That's really where you find kind of your passion, right? Some people have a very, there's big global challenge passions, right? Sustainability, global energy, social equality, that kind of, social justice. Those are all things that people are extremely passionate about. And then it becomes a question of how do you potentially position what you're doing in engineering to help fuel that passion or address those particular questions, right? If you're looking for, I'm passionate about increasing diversity in engineering, then it's sort of how can I do that? How can I encourage a more diverse class, for instance, or how do I promote engineering to other sectors, that sort of thing. If it's around sustainability, it's like which part of sustainability are you interested in? Is it I want a better solar cell, or is it actually, I'm more interested in figuring out how to deal with the life cycle of some of these things, right? That's a much more interesting sustainability question. So it's really thinking globally about some of these problems. I always advocate for students, read the newspaper, read what's happening in the world, because there's a ton of stuff that you'll see that will suddenly strike you as like, wow, I didn't realize that this was the key challenge, right? And that's where people will suddenly pick up and it'll turn them on to something.
Mm-hmm. That's very good advice, because I think I've personally just been through that. I'm probably still going through that. I'm not too sure where I should be going with this engineering path, and yeah, I'll start reading the news now every day.
This is what happened to me. I didn't really care for global politics. I just I don't really care. I'm focused on university and academic stuff. And then you traveling around the world and you I was watching Bloomberg television, right, which is sort of business and politics and technology as well. And you suddenly realize, how geopolitics plays such a role in impacting development in different sectors, right? And then you start to think about, well, how politics starts to play a role in innovation, where innovation takes place, and how that starts to shift because of things like political plays in different countries, right? Mm-hmm. And it's sort of understanding that sort of stuff, which is something interesting from a political science perspective. They've always managed it, but from engineers well, I don't think about political science stuff, right? It's like that's out of my sphere, right? But then you realize actually it's all interwoven, right? Companies, global companies that are headquartered in certain countries, right? All of a sudden they're stuck, right? But then you realize they're stuck, but they're not really stuck, because there's politics that come into play as to why certain companies can't operate in certain sectors. But it's part of a competition between companies, but then there's also competition between countries. And so these are really interesting and provocative questions that become important for students as they go into companies. Remember, you're going to start at the entry level, but at some point you're going to move up, right? And at some point, you may become the senior vice president, or you may become someone who becomes very involved in how your company works on a global stage. And so understanding how these parameters come into play becomes important. How NAFTA affects mobility of undergraduates is actually an interesting problem, right? Interns were never part of NAFTA. So that's why it's so difficult for people to do PYs into the U.S. in a sense, was because NAFTA never covered it, right? The new USMCA also doesn't really cover internships. The U.S. closing down H-1B visas is a huge impediment to Canadians going into the U.S., right? Mm-hmm. Green cards becoming much more restrictive. There's all sorts of things that students don't think about because you're worried about
school. Yeah.
School. You're worried about school, but then you realize, I want to do an internship in this country or do this here. It's like, well, you can't.
Yeah.
It's like, well, why can't I? Well, because of right? These are huge geopolitical things that you'd think education would actually get around, and in a sense, academic institutions are the best way to maintain global stability, because academic institutions will always have exchanges, right? You'll always have students going back and forth. You'll always be able to train students and all this kind of stuff between countries. So they're always the ones that are least affected by some of these things. But it's important for students to understand these complexities.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, you mentioned like the visa issue in the US. That's also something I considered before coming to university in Canada. One of the reasons I came from a school in Costa Rica, and we had like an English education, and it was an American school, so I originally thought I was going to the school in the US. But then I talked to my college counselor, and she told me that it's hard to get jobs in the US because of the visa issues. And so now like a lot of the smart students that from my school are actually coming to UofT and like Canadian schools because of that.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. And it's, every country, to be fair, has immigration policies, right, on number of foreign nationals and things like that. And it's just a question of how restrictive those policies are. And the U.S. currently is one of the more restrictive countries about that. And this is a major draw for Canada right now in general, is that students, especially with graduate students, time spent in your graduate program actually counts towards your PR status, right? So it becomes very easy and very quick to switch yourself over to a PR, permanent resident of Canada, when you're a grad student, because part of your grad studies counts as work. And there's certainly lots of companies that would look to pivot out of the US to come and establish bases in Canada, because they're in the same time zones as the US. But it's a lot easier for their workers who may be on visas in the US to be able to work in Canada with visas in Canada, because of just the difference in the policies. And the fact that our policies are a lot more stable, I think, than the US ones are right now. But we'd love to encourage more students to come up from South America, Central America. I think that's one sector, that's one area of the globe that we don't traditionally draw a lot of students up from, right? And increasing our visibility to students from Costa Rica, students from Guatemala, Honduras, right? Chile, Argentina, Brazil. Those are all countries where they're great students down there, and we'd love to have more of them consider coming to U of T for sure. It'd be great. So tell your friends.
Yeah, I will tell my friends.
Yeah. So it's at the 5 o'clock 1 hour mark now, so we would like to wrap it up.
No problem.
We would just like to ask you to give kind of like one last general advice you would give to all student bodies at U of T during the COVID situation, pandemic. It can be anything related to like mental health or like academic advice, or just like a word or two.
So I guess my advice to everybody right now, whether it's staff, students, faculty, students in particular, relax, enjoy your time, and don't stress out about it. Everybody's going through the same situation. This is not a normal situation for everybody. Work, but balance it. Take time off. Relax, but do reach out if you need someone to talk to. It's so important to have a balance in your life in general. And school is one thing, school is important, but everything else is equally important, if not more important. So keep that in mind as you're worrying about a midterm, worrying about that next report that's due. It's all part of a process. I am full confidence that in everybody's ability to succeed in our program, and I will do my best to make sure that you do.
Thank you guys for listening to the First Year Decoded podcast. And once again, thank you, Dean Yip, for being on our show with us today. Keep posted for the future episodes of the First Year Decoded podcast, and we'll see you next time. This podcast is hosted by IEEE UofT, content creation done by Akinori Kimura, Brenny Chow, Himana Shindo, Hachin Zhang, and Catherine Leung. Music created by Sujay Kumar, audio edited by Akinori Kimura, and graphics done by Kathy Zhang. Remember to follow us on social media, IEEE UofT, to get more information and updates about future events and more content. Once again, thanks for listening to First Year Decoded. We will see you on the next episode.